Hello, everyone, and welcome to your final day of PyCon Italia. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you all, and especially thank you to all of you for making it here. I know that last night was a late night. Hopefully, we didn't have too many spritzes and too much wine and too much fun. I was super bummed. I apparently left right before the concert started last night, but I heard that that was quite a feat to see. So I'm here to present to you my talk today, Stay Curious, Reflections on Passion, Risk-Taking, and Re-Invention. So first, a little bit about me. I'm Emily Morehouse-Valcarcel. I am the co-founder and director of engineering, it is early for all of us. Co-founder and director of engineering of a company called Cuddlesoft. We are a full-cycle digital product development company, so we take people from those sort of like napkin sketch ideas through user experience design, building out their software, maintaining it, scaling it. So we do everything from web, mobile, IoT, and the cloud. I'm also a Python core developer and a Python steering council member. So essentially what that means is Python core developers are the folks who actually develop the Python language itself. There are a lot of people who go into that process, but Python core developers are specifically the ones who just happen to have commit privileges on GitHub, but are sort of like that core group of people that help really build the language itself. And then I'm also a steering council member. So the steering council was introduced when Guido van Rossum, the creator of Python, stepped down. And so the steering council has kind of filled that gap that he left of making decisions for what actually goes into the language and the changes that are sort of approved or not. So typically these come in the form of things called PEPs, or Python enhancement proposals. So that's the majority of what the steering council does, but we also have some oversight over some various parts of the rest of the Python ecosystem, including the developer in residence that the PSF hires as well. And then finally, I served as the PyCon US chair from 2020 to 2022. This was a really interesting time to have to chair a conference. This one, we actually, for the very first year, we had to make the switch from an in-person to an online conference in a matter of weeks. And it was a really tough thing to go through, both logistically, legally, trying to figure out what protections we had, and then also trying to figure out how we would possibly bring a worthwhile online experience to our attendees who, nobody was really doing that at the time. So it was a really interesting thing to see. Grateful for the support that I had then, and then also grateful I stuck around for a third year. Typically people only chair for 2 years because it's just a lot of work. But I did stick around for that last year to actually get to see PyCon US come back in person, which was a really, really lovely thing. Okay, cool. So enough about that. If you want to find me online, I am Emily E. Morehouse, basically anywhere. And I did also want to give a really huge shout out to the organizers. I was actually supposed to be here last year and had to cancel at the last minute. There were some changes with mask requirements and the lack of vaccines for my daughter. And we were all supposed to be traveling out, and it was just something that I didn't feel that I could do safely. But I'm absolutely thrilled that they welcomed me back, did not hate me so much that they were willing to let me come back this year. So huge thank you to all the organizers as well. And so I've actually have been here since Wednesday, so I've gotten a chance to see quite a bit of the city, got to meet quite a few people. So I'm absolutely loving this beautiful city, and so is my toddler. Turns out that puddles are extremely fascinating things anywhere in the world, but it's even better when you have a beautiful backdrop behind you. So she has just absolutely fallen in love with Italy. She's loved going around and seeing the city. And I'm a little bit worried that she's not gonna let us leave. So if anybody has any hookups for immigration, that would be great, because she is absolutely loving it. Cool, so I actually wanted to start off kind of getting to know all of you all just a little bit. So how many people here are students? Can I just see a show of hands? Okay, how many people have like a professional working job writing software? Cool. How many people consider themselves to be beginner programmers? Okay. Intermediate, maybe say like 3 to 6 years of experience? Okay. And how many people have been programming for 7 or more years? Awesome. Okay, so there's a really surprisingly skewed group than I was expecting. So that's really excellent. I'm glad I asked. And how many people here consider themselves to have some sort of like significant life partner, a spouse, a husband, wife? Okay, I'm really hoping that there's not any like newly anointed couples nervously looking at their partner right now being like, are you gonna raise your hand? Am I gonna raise my hand? Maybe we should not. Should we have a conversation? Do we need to go outside? And how many people here have kids? Okay. All right, so as I was reflecting on what I wanted to talk about today, I realized that it has actually been over 3 years since I gave my last talk. The last talk that I gave was actually at PyCon Columbia in 2020. Again, one of those like really lucky things that I just had a chance to travel right before the pandemic hit. And it really feels like a lifetime ago. Like thinking about all that we've been through, the changes, the pandemic, basically going into this hole and then eventually coming back out and having to be real people again, and all the things that have changed since then. When I had a chance to see people again this year at PyCon US, back when I was able to actually be a normal attendee and not running around like a chicken with my head cut off, I had a chance to talk to people and say like, hey, how have you been? And I really hate the people who are like, oh, good, 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 when like, what is good? How do you sum up the last 3-4 years that you've seen someone just saying good? So the thing that I liked to say was, a lot of life has happened. And so I was trying to reflect on the things that have changed since then, the things that I could talk about. So I guess I could talk about my experiences as a core developer, as a steering council member, what our process looks like, what our visions and values are for Python's future. I could talk about bringing people together, the importance and the uniqueness of our Python community, and how we faltered and regained strength after the pandemic. I could talk about development with Python as somebody who uses Python on a very regular basis to build web applications, data pipelines, and processing. I could talk about running a business, about company culture, about managing remote teams, about how our company went from a primarily in-person team to hybrid and now fully remote. I could talk about managing and growing an engineering team. I could talk about parenting while working, or I could talk about balancing running a business while chairing conferences and raising a tiny human and keeping up with all of my open source work at the same time. And I realized that something that all of those things have in common is passion. And no, I actually really don't like the word passion. I think it's kind of a fluff word. But there's something that we lean on that word to describe that is a little bit unescapable. And so my passion has driven me to attain some incredible things. I've done a lot over my career. I would often be asked, but how do you actually do it all? And honestly, I don't know how I did for so many years. Because passion isn't sustainable. I needed to figure out how to reframe my experiences and my goals into something that was actually attainable and sustainable for the long term. And so as kids, we're told to chase our dreams. We ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we get answers like firefighter or ballerina or astronaut. From the time that I was a kid, I never did a lot of sitting still. I was always bouncing from academic endeavor to extracurricular activity, to theater, rehearsals, to dance classes, to voice lessons. And I did it all because I was told that I could. I was told that I could chase my dreams. I thrived on a busy schedule as a kid, don't get me wrong. I was a theater kid, I was an academic one, and my time was filled constantly. I graduated at the top of my high school class, and next to my diploma, I had a resume of over 100 theater productions. When I say I didn't have any free time, I had no free time. And so by the college, I had a slightly more realistic view of my future. I was trying to figure out what it was I could do as my adult job, not just the imaginary one that I picked as a kid, without knowing anything about how the world worked. Because that's the thing. Your dreams sort of live in your head. They don't get to have a very direct mapping to what your reality of those dreams actually might be. So I took my first programming class in 2011 during the summer before my third year of college. I was studying theater and criminology. I was absolutely still chasing that dream that one day I was going to be a big Broadway actress and make it and move to New York City and all of that. So I thought that maybe one day I could still be a performer by trade. But I still had the foresight that that path was a highly unlikely one. So I had a backup plan. I actually was originally studying biochemistry in school. I did an internship at a lab and realized that I hated it. And so I was really interested in forensics. And so instead of going the biochemistry route for forensics, I started taking criminology classes. And it just so happened to turn out that our university had just launched a computer criminology program. And they were like, hey, you've got really great math scores. Why don't you go try a programming class? And I did. And I absolutely loved it. So I was hooked immediately. And of course, being the overachiever, dream-chasing person that I was, I actually decided to add an additional major as I was going into, the second half of my college career. So I joined our university's ACM group. I was nominated to the board. I started a position as a research assistant. I hope you're starting to see a pattern here. I latched onto the classes that everyone else seemed to hate. They were everyone's least favorite. Language design, theory of computation, compilers. In 2014, I faced a fork in the road. I could continue on the path of academia, on from a master's degree to a PhD. I could maybe join a research laboratory. I could move to Silicon Valley and join a huge tech company. But as it turned out, I would do none of those things. Instead, I actually dropped out of my master's program at the time and started a company with my then boyfriend, Cuddlesoft. We joked then that Cuddlesoft was our baby. Anyone who actually has kids can attest to the fact that starting a company is nothing like having an actual baby, but the naive person that I was at the time called it that, which I now find only minorly offensive. But we poured ourselves into it, and we were good at it. But the fact that we were good at it didn't save ourselves from working 60 to 80-hour weeks to build this business. But it gave us a feeling of purpose, of being alive. It was the thing that kept us learning and growing and investigating. But we invested all of the time that we had to give into it. I like to call this feeling the hum, and I stole this from a TED Talk by Shonda Rhimes, which is an absolutely incredible TED Talk. If you haven't watched her speak before, please go watch it. She says, the hum is the buzz, the rush, the action and activity, the thing that drives you to strive for greatness, no matter the cost. Or maybe it's called being a workaholic. Maybe it's called genius. Maybe it's called ego. Maybe it's just called fear of failure. So I chased that feeling, that vibration, the synchronicity where everything was exciting. I felt like my life had a direction because I was busy, because I had opportunity after opportunity to say yes to and keep my schedule filled. But somewhere along the lines, something was missing. I loved doing what we were doing, but I really missed the academic side of things. It's really great to learn how to do mobile development and web development, how to run a business, how to run finances, all of the different hats that you wind up having to wear as a business owner. But there was this itch in the back of my brain that I couldn't quite scratch. And so in 2015 at PyCon US, Guido van Rossum announced that it was his goal to add female core developers to the team. At that point, there were no female core developers. It felt like kismet. I didn't have any spare time, but you make time when you feel like the path that you're walking is the one that's made for you. It was really hard work. I set aside time, devotion. I set aside hours of my week regularly to either meet with other core developers or work on my own things. And it paid off when I did eventually become a core developer in 2018. My time, my effort, my skills, my desire to be included in something I loved, was validated. The thing with saying yes to so many things, though, is that you never really know when you need to say no. I was asked to co-chair PyCon US in 2019. Yes, the hum. Chair PyCon US 2020 to 2021, which of course then turned into 2022. Yes, the hum. I let myself get so busy that I couldn't see a way out. Each new thing that I would take on just added to my anxiety. The thing is, when you're juggling so many things, it's easy to feel like you're not actually doing any of them extraordinarily well. It was self-imposed imposter syndrome on steroids, and I didn't know how to stop it. I've come to realize that I was raised to be an overachiever under the guise of chasing dreams. That kid who was told that they could do anything also wasn't told when to stop or cut back or say no. I think it's fine when we're younger. There's not as many other possibilities or responsibilities to contend with. And you never want to say no to a kid when they have that fiery passion in their eyes. Busyness used to be exhilarating because the possibility and potential that it all held gave importance to my life. I loved what I was doing at every stage, don't get me wrong. There's not really room to not love it. It was too hectic, too grueling, too busy to not love every second. It was also driving me at full speed with a single finger on the wheel towards the cliffs of extreme burnout. But sometimes it's nice to feel like you're good at something, to feel involved. I was too scared that if I stepped back, that silence would mean failure. And who would I be if I didn't have that drive, that hum, that ambition? If all of my work stopped, who did that leave? And then COVID hit. The pandemic brought with it lockdowns around the world. We shut down and we lived in boxes. Then what did I do? I worked, and I worked, and I worked. I took those things that I knew those things that I could still do in my life, and I just amplified those 1,000%. These workaholic tendencies absolutely started to get the best of me. But we had no excuse. We couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't do any other things. What else was I supposed to do? Just sit and play video games? I should have sat and played video games. But I had been on this train that had literally never stopped. I didn't know how to slow down. And for a while there, things sped up pretty significantly. There was less to do, so the things we knew could take even more of a center stage, like working. But when you're living in a box, and at the time I felt like I was living in a box, I was living in a very small townhouse that was literally shaped like a cereal box. It was about 8 feet in width, and then once you counted the stairs, there was about 5 feet there, and let me tell you, it was impossible to find a couch that would fit in that living room. And so when you're living in a box, you're seeing the same things over and over, the same walls, not seeing any other people. It starts to feel restricting. And at some point, my now husband, who is still my business partner, we stopped and looked back at what we had been doing over the last few months and realized that we'd been doing almost nothing besides working. And so, what's the best way to know that you're burnt out? Someone who knows you really, really well tells you that you're burnt out. I would talk about how I wasn't able to focus or get anything done, how just done with things I felt. I wasn't really inspired by the things that I was doing anymore. My husband would start to say, do you maybe think that nope. Yeah, but do you think maybe you're just getting a little bit burnt out? Nope. And I just didn't want to hear it for the longest time because it meant having to step away and having to do something different and having to start saying no to things that I really desperately wanted to do because those were the things that brought my life value. And as an adult, saying yes to everything has actually led me to a lot of work with a lot of misdirected fulfillment. It's not something sustainable, and it's not something that leads to a lifelong journey. It's one that comes in spurts and peaks and valleys. So when I was asked to do something, to lead a project, to write a book, to organize an event, I was thrilled to be thought of, to be included. How could I say no without writing myself out of the picture? So something had to change, and it did. So we found out that we were pregnant in September 2020, and it was the most compelling, guaranteed reason to absolutely force you to make a change, right? Logistically, there are no more 60 to 80-hour work weeks if you want to be involved in your kid's life, especially as a mother and especially in those early stages. There's just literally not time in the day for you to do much else besides be a parent. And so we had to figure out how we could keep up with all of our commitments, everything we wanted to do while growing a family and maintaining ourselves along with it. This is still a balance that I'm striving to find. But then there was this bundle of magic that changed everything. The hum was gone. The engine turned off. It was replaced with a vacation responder to my email. I logged out of Slack. I stopped looking at anything. And all of the things work were replaced with sleep deprivation, bottles, diapers, feeding schedules, brain fog, and a love so big it made me do crazy things like sit there and stare at my sleeping child for hours when I myself was sleep deprived and hadn't gotten more than like 4 hours of sleep in the last day. But 3 months of parental leave, yes, the US sucks, ended, and I went back to work. I picked up where I left off, or at least I tried to, with the time that I had left, but the engine wouldn't start. I did things that brought me that hum before, brought me that feeling that I had been chasing, but it never came. As kids, we're often told that we can be anything we want to be, do anything we want to do. It's a beautiful thing to buy into. Kids are born with such an innate curiosity. You know, once they figure out the whole holding their head up and getting into the walking and talking thing. But their entire lives start out as a science experiment. My daughter conducts dozens of experiments daily. What happens if I push this button? What happens if I stomp in this puddle? What do I do now that my shoes are wet? This is also how we wound up with a very wet bathroom after she discovered the bidet in our hotel room. In her defense, the bidet does look like a perfectly sized toddler sink that's right at her level, so I get it. But her recent obsession has actually been all these really small holes in the ground that are scattered throughout this hotel. Have you noticed them? They're very small holes, very intentionally placed, fitted with a spring and a small covering. She's fascinated by them. She stops at every single one. She'll bend down and push on the spring and let it pop back up, and push on the spring and let it pop back up, and I swear she would do that for the entire day if we let her. She hasn't quite figured out why they're there, but she noticed them. Probably because they're at her level, probably because they're something she's never really seen before. But as adults, we don't even notice it. Maybe if I describe it to you and we realize, oh, it's just part of the door locking mechanism, of course. There's a bar from the door that goes into it that keeps it locked. But to her, that curiosity won't be stopped. And so it's a tricky line to walk, to not stifle that curiosity and creativity, but to try to lead us towards a life that is going to allow us to build something sustainable around it. Because that fiery passion is the thing that got us interested in the first place. But there are no ways to kind of approach this with a child that are going to be perfect. And so I try to not stifle that creativity in my child, but sometimes it's definitely like, all right, kid, you've pushed it 100 times. We really got to go. Breakfast is ending in 10 minutes, that kind of thing. And you do have to kind of make your own set of rules around these things for when you're going to encourage that curiosity and when you have to end it. And so, of course, there are rules for safety that we hold, social rules that we attempt to maintain. If any of you noticed the small toddler who was nearly tripping all of the waiters at the dinner last night, that was absolutely my daughter, who refused to sit still at a certain point into the night. She is still, understandably, just 2 years old. There are important rules of cause and effect that we try to teach her. But as we encourage curiosity, you can do anything quickly becomes you can do everything. How do we identify the things that we want to do? How do we distill them, boil them down into what can keep us going and when our passions and our curiosities keep changing? Time speeds up when you become a parent. I'm not totally sure how the physics of it all works, but there were definitely 24 hours in the day before I have a kid, and there's definitely only 14 hours a day now, and I still feel like I can't do anything done, and I don't get to sleep. Before I had a kid, I'd always had time and almost nothing but to pour into the things that I wanted to do. How else would I have worked so much? How else would I have accomplished so many different things? But not only do you now have this tiny human to keep alive, you have more laundry and more meals and more playing and more. And the time goes so fast. I don't want to work when my daughter asks me to play. Somewhere along the lines, I started saying no to work and yes to her. It took a while to see it. I had transformed into something else. I was no longer the person who felt like I needed to make contributions or be online or attend events just to kind of show face, to be important, to have impact. All my titles were scratched off. My headline, my desk plaque now read, Mom. But that was the thing that I loved doing, the person I loved being, and that hum started up again. I couldn't figure out how to reconcile it, how to be this new person and completely let go of all of the other things that I had once been, because a part of me still wanted those things. And so I was left with a question. I had lost who I was before my primary role was something different. Did it have to change because I just had a new way to spend my time? I really struggled to separate who I was versus the things that I was actually doing. So who would I be if those things that I used to do were stripped away and just the person that I am was left behind? What did I have to change to take care of the person underneath all of the doing? I had to learn to be without doing. I had to allow myself to move the value that I had given to work, whether open source or my business, to myself. So I had to allow myself to evolve, to change, and to take value in who I'd become and the path that got me there. For me, motherhood has actually turned into a source of fuel and inspiration, a place of refuge and growth. There's nothing that brings me more joy or happiness than seeing my daughter discover the world, even if it is just these tiny little springs and holes in the ground. I don't know why. One that really got me the other day was I saw my daughter, for the first time, pick up an apple and take a bite out of it. Now, the parent inside of me was like, oh no, this child has choked on apples before. No, we're not going there yet. But it was just an amazing thing to see her, after watching somebody else do it, figure out how to do something for the very first time. And you get a lot of firsts with your kids. I actually saw one of the lightning talks the other night, and I am heartbroken for the parent that can't be there for a lot of those firsts, because they're magical and they don't happen again. You might get a second and a third, but you don't get another first. And so my transition hasn't been one of self-sacrifice that we often talk about with mothers. It's one of joy and peace and symbiotic growth. It's not that I am now placing my daughter first, or that I am less than anything else because I am now a mom. It's that I have so much more life and joy and curiosity that I get to witness on a daily basis because I get to see it through the eyes of my daughter. It means everything else that takes my time must deserve it wholeheartedly, because the bar has been raised. And that means cutting out the things that gave me anxiety or stress, or that I said yes to just to add another millionth thing to the end of my to-do list. All in all, my fear of doing less, I was worried that I would mean less or have less of an impact. I think I've actually been able to do the opposite. By really taking a step back and only focusing on the things that I can actually truly accomplish, that really bring me joy, that really bring that hum, I've been able to do them so much better. The time that I'm actually spending is more focused, more enthusiastic. I no longer feel the anxiety or the begrudgery of not knowing how to prioritize my to-do list, and I actually get to be excited about the things that I do have on my list. Now, it has not been easy to take that 60 to 80 hour work week of doing everything that I used to want to do and distilling it down into what is probably, honestly, working with a kid closer to a 30 to 35 hour work week. And I'm lucky, especially in the US, to get to work that little. But figuring out how to make my business work and my open source work and volunteering and community and having impact has really been a struggle. But our passion fades over time. In our life, in our relationships, in learning, we're wired to crave variety. And it makes sense. Who would want to be doing the same thing over and over again on a daily basis for years on end? That would get pretty boring, right? And so sometimes it's a matter of needing to change things up. There's actually a rule or kind of unspoken thing in academia that if you've been working on the same thing for about 10 years, it's time to switch things up. If you've been working on it for that long, you've likely gone into almost all of the little nooks and crannies that you possibly could, and it's time to do something else, take a different direction. And so depending on how deep you want to go on a single topic, if you want to get into all of those nooks and crannies that academics do in their research, sure, 10 years. But for a lot of us, we probably work on something for 3 to 5 years. You might consider yourself a Python expert or a Django expert or whatever that might be. And eventually we get to the end of it and it feels like we're just doing the same thing over and over again. I feel this often in my business where it's like, my God, how many more web applications can I write? Like, how much more passion do I have burning for RESTful APIs and gets and puts? And it just starts to feel like you're doing the same thing over and over. And so I am blessed and lucky and all of those things to get to be reinvigorated by this curiosity that my daughter has brought me. And I also consider myself lucky to have been sort of forced into this position where I had to ruthlessly prioritize the things that mattered to me, which means that now if something was a 3 out of 10 on my to-do list before in terms of the joy that it brought me or the enthusiasm that I had for it, that's something that goes away. And it takes time, and I've had responsibilities and things that I've had to withhold my end of, but over time, I hope that I can just continue to have this bar raised incredibly high so that the things that I'm doing are the things that really matter to me. And so I make time with my daughter for the afternoon yoga breaks, for the dance parties in the middle of making dinner, for the just one more book for the 10th time before bedtime. But it usually doesn't take that long. 5 to 15 minutes is usually all that I can get out of my toddler in terms of when I'm that most important person in the room to her. But it does remind me to stop and look around in front of me to see where she's getting that curiosity and enthusiasm from and how I can bring a little bit more of that into my life. And so I'd forgotten what it looked like in my life to have balance. And in fact, I'm not really sure that I ever did have balance. Because those days where I would leave for school at 7:30 in the morning and not get back until after 10 o'clock at night after rehearsals, when my dad was already in bed and he'd left dinner on the stove, that wasn't balanced either. For so long, I was focused on all things programming so much that it actually became my personality. It became one of the few things that I could actually talk about with people. It became one of the only lenses that I could actually see myself through. I forgot that I liked making art or theater or yoga or going on hikes or video games. In fact, I'd actually argue that establishing a balance between not just my work and my life, but all of these other interests, made myself a more varied person, and it inherently increased my own worldview. There were so many things that I was missing out on because I had my head dug into the sand in this one area. There's a lot of great stuff out there that's worth a look too. It doesn't have to be just programming. And so my final thought that I'm sort of bringing forward with me into this new phase is to focus on a few things that bring you joy, just a few things that bring you that hum, that make you feel compelled to work on them, and do those things incredibly well. If there's anything that feels like you're waiting for the mud on, that you dread seeing come up on your to-do list, figure out why, and figure out a way to either re-imbue that curiosity, that passion into what you're doing, or maybe find something else to work on. It was a hard lesson that, yes, sometimes you do have to say no to the things that you don't want to do, but sometimes you have to say no to the things that you actually really do want to do. Overload leads to burnout, leads to needing to rekindle the fire when a slow burn is so much easier to maintain. For me, this means being honest with myself about the bandwidth that I have and ruthlessly prioritizing the things that I have on my plate. And I've learned to say no or not right now. And the thing is that I've remembered that if something's not right for you now and you tell somebody, hey, I'd really love to do this, it sounds really exciting, but I just can't take this onto my plate right now, they'll likely remember you and come back to you the next time, and they'll actually have that much more respect for you for knowing that you wanted to do it well. And it doesn't have to take this giant life-altering milestone of having a kid to convince you to choose yourself. It's not like I didn't have the same issues before then. It was just having a kid was the breaking point for the particular schedule and lifestyle that I had been leading. But it would have happened sooner or later, whether I'd had a kid or not. And so you can choose to invest in yourself, your well-being, to make your journey into a marathon and not a sprint. You can make conscious, intentional changes and decisions to build a fulfilling life, both inside and outside of work, and to be a more whole human being. Your future self will thank you. Thank you. And now I can see the lovely people who are behind this laptop. Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you, Emily. It was very inspiring. I think all of us a little bit overworked during COVID, and I did. So there's already a few questions. If any of you want to add more questions, remember Slido keynote. So one question is related to the US culture as well. If the US culture of hustling all the time, so the environment that you were in, even traveling before, is influenced your way that you just tell us to work even more and more, and how in general the environment influence people has for your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that especially in the US and especially in larger tech companies, you see a lot of variety in sort of that hustle culture. I think that there is this expectation that everyone always has a side project. And I think that's really what they push in the United States, is that, you know, if you're working for Facebook, you're also doing this other thing, or trying to start your own business. Especially in Silicon Valley, there's always somebody who's like trying to build the next big thing. But I do think that in general, like, work culture in the United States has kind of been a trickle-down effect of expecting people to work, you know, 8 to 5. We don't get a lot of vacation time. We don't get parental leave. There's just a lot of things from like an infrastructure and a government perspective that we don't get experience or like awarded with. And so I absolutely think that it's a big impact. I think that, at least from what I've seen in smaller companies and in our company itself, there has been a bit of a backlash with COVID where people are wanting to reclaim their lives. And slowly but surely, I'm hoping that the US kind of catches up to the rest of the world, and I hope that the rest of the world also keeps moving forward. And I know some countries or some companies have been trying out 4-day work weeks and like figuring out that balance. And I think that once we have more balance in our work life, it also can help us shift where our free time is expected to go. Because I think that's a big part of it, is that your free time doesn't typically just go to yourself or to your family. It also goes to those other things that are sort of work related or in that hustle culture. Thank you.
And on top of that, also, how talking about environment and our relationships, how intercultural relationship interaction in a way influence your thinking? You think that perhaps getting exposed to different people, different around the world, how that influence your thinking also, perhaps seeing things in perspective for your work?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I've been really lucky to have a chance to meet a lot of people from other different countries, and it's definitely had a pretty big impact on me. And I think especially as we've been looking at, you know, the environment that we want to raise our daughter, and obviously I feel like most of the world knows about all of the issues that the United States has with public schooling and safety for kids in schools. We've been looking at other countries, and I am comforted that there are other options out there, but I'm also incredibly saddened that the United States feels so far behind in a lot of these ways. So it's definitely taken me and encouraged me to kind of step back and look at least the small impacts that we can have within our own company, where we get to control the culture, we get to control the policies, we get to control what we give to our employees, to try to kind of set the balance there based on what I've been able to experience that other people have in other countries.
Thank you. So talking about influence, are there any people in particular that influence your your decision in life, in particular from personal and professional experience, and things like, I want to be there if it wasn't without perhaps one interaction, so people get curious about your mentors or anything that influence your way in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a big part of it, and a part of my journey, is definitely like becoming a core developer. So I actually got a chance to like personally be mentored by Guido himself. So he played a really big path in that. There are also a couple of other core developers, particularly Eric Snow, who would meet with me. We just kind of like co-work together, and it was like the kindest thing that anyone had ever done for me, where I was like, I am nobody, and this person just thinks that we have like interesting enough stuff to work on, and he wanted me to be successful to the point that like it's just like, hey, yeah, let's just work on these things together and like be there as the support system. So both of those people I think have definitely played a really big role in my path, as well as any of these other people who have just sort of like thought of me and included me and made me feel like I was doing something that was important. So all of like the PyCon staff, the PSF software foundation, all those people who are involved. But I also think it's a really interesting thing to think about how intentionally we choose our journeys. Because I also look back and I'm like, wow, I didn't intend to be here at all, right? Like, I could look back and see people who had some sort of positive impact on me, like starting that company or taking that research position or whatever it was, sort of encouraging me. But I also don't think that I ever really made an intentional step to do the thing that I was doing until much, much later on.
Yes. So I relate a lot with the person that asked these questions, and I think you too, due to this talk. How you can say no to something that you really like, but at the moment you can't pursue?
Yeah.
And perhaps there's a no for ourselves too. Like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I try to keep in mind that I can only really have one major sort of side thing that takes up my time. And so right now, the thing that takes up most of my sort of free time for open source is being on the steering council. We actually meet weekly for about 2 hours a week. And then we also have time, I usually set aside at least an hour or two to review PEPs that are incoming, some time to respond to people on Discourse, some time to draft monthly updates. So when I go back and look at it, I'm probably spending 4 to 6 hours a week on these things. And so the thing that I try to remind myself, and I've had to do this recently, I like have a dream of writing a book one day, and I can't do it right now. Like, that's going to take so much time. And so the thing that I try to remind myself is like, if I added this to my list and I had to go try to schedule out my week, am I going to feel excited about this thing, or am I going to feel stressed about this thing? And so one thing that I'll try to do is like, okay, I was super excited about potentially writing a book. So I put on my to-do list for a month, just write the outline, right? Just write it. And every single time I'd see it and it'd pop up and I'd be like, I don't have time for that. That's stressing me out. I'm just going to bump it to next week, bump it to next week, bump it to next week. So I'll do these little like thought experiments with myself to see like, yeah, I'm really excited about it, but where is this actually going to fall on my daily prioritization and my daily sort of stress scale? And then that's when I know, okay, like maybe I don't want to say no, but I have to say no. And I do really try to lean back on things that like, if I am really excited about it, I try to say, hey, no, I can't take this on right now. These are the things that are taking my time. But like, once that changes, this is like the next thing to sort of move up in the docket. And so another thing I've started doing is again, trying to be more intentional, because I feel like so much of my journey, again, you just don't necessarily make these choices intentionally. So I've tried to do a bunch of like life planning, and I have projects that I want to do one day or trips that I want to take. And so I try to use that as a place to like put these ideas and put these things that like stress me out if I see them on a daily to-do list, but there's still a home for them that I can go back and look and see, oh, wow, like I wanted to do this thing, I wanted to do that thing, and use it to then go back and get inspired again by it later.
I hope it's difficult to practice, right?
It's very difficult to practice.
On the top of that, quickly, you have any suggestion on how to say no to your boss or people in charge?
Spoiler alert, I don't have a boss. Oh. Probably not the right person to ask on this
how
one.
You will receive it? Like, I agree suggested to
yeah, absolutely. So we are like very aware of the like workload and the pressures that we put on our employees. We're a really small company, and I feel like in small companies that usually means that you're I don't want to say picking up the slack, but like you're picking up on all those things that just don't have somebody else to do. And so I try to make sure that I'm checking in with all my direct reports or having other people check in to make sure that we're saying like, hey, how are you feeling? And not necessarily put somebody in the position that they have to say no, that they can't take something on, but to actually have that conversation before you just try to assign something else to them to say, hey, I'm thinking about, having you tech lead on your first project. How would that feel to you? And actually like talking through the emotions of it before we get to the point where like you have to say yes or no. And then since we've already had that conversation and we're in it, we can usually very easily see like, okay, yes, this is it, this is the time, or no, there are these other things going on, or, these things are, need to be upskilled or whatever it is before we get to that point. So I try to not put it on the person themselves to have to say no.
You mentioned curiosity and as kids as a natural way to go for it. But what will you suggest to reignite curiosity and the spark of curiosity in people that seems at that moment to don't care about anything? But perhaps I think the person wants to say also to give a way to explore more about the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those are really like kind of hard points to be at in your life where you just don't find anything interesting. And so my suggestion for that would be to like pick 5 different totally random things and just tell yourself that you're going to do it. You don't have to like it. You might go take a stand-up class. You might go take a pottery class. You might get a new video game, get a new book, and just allow yourself to do other things that you don't have to like. And eventually maybe you'll find one of those things that does kind of like spark that interest. But I think trying to put pressure on yourself of like finding the thing that really excites you can make it that much harder to actually figure it out.
Yeah. So in case that you want to help someone to spark this kind of curiosity, perhaps you can invite him in one of these experiences, right? Mm-hmm. Have a step forward. Okay. That's an interesting question to have, like a quite an alternate path reality. If you don't have kids, how else can you actually make yourself tip to and live a more balanced way? I often try this, but fail. So just in case a person don't have kids, probably already that has a lot more time. But in general, I guess some tips on how to live a balanced life, work life, and you touch some things, but perhaps you want to add something more on that.
Yeah, so balanced life even without kids, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so in theory, it makes it easier because you do have all of that time. But I think there is the contradiction of like, once you have kids, your kids do pull you in so many different other directions that might not necessarily be like the thing that you're actually interested in. And so I think that a lot of it is like setting time aside to do something else that's not your primary job function, and to maybe find something that like intrigues you about your daily life. Maybe you really like food and you can become a better cook, or you like being outdoors. And so I think for me, at least with my schedule and the way that I work, I really have to kind of schedule those things. So that would be my recommendation, is just say like, I am not going to be in my home every like Saturday, and I'm going to get up and I'm going to go do something out, and I'm either going to go to a new restaurant or I'm going to go on a hike, and just like try to create that separation, and not give yourself an option to like just fall into those same sort of patterns that you maybe were falling into before.
Thank you. And good tips. We hope to apply that. Is there any one last question for the audience in here? Otherwise, I will. There? No. No, I wasn't sure. Can you raise your hand if there was one on the back? Maybe it was just a scratching. Sorry. Yeah. So, would like to know if you want to share anything, last words in order to follow your tips, and or anything that you want to share as last words. Last words.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me share this. I think this is it's been
There is a question. Thank you very much for pointing out. Yes.
So how did you focus on so many things at the same time while you were a kid and even now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that especially when I was younger and especially when I was a kid, I just had a lot more mental elasticity. Once you hit 30, you feel tired all the time and you're like, oh, you do feel old now. This is great. But I think that everything was sort of new and exciting. And I think for me, there wasn't an end game for the things that I was doing as a kid, right? I could go and be in theater productions or do dance competitions or read books or study chemistry, whatever it was. And it was strictly for the act of doing the thing that made me excited. And I think that amount of intense interest can kind of fuel you through things. And now as an adult, I start to realize you wake up on a Saturday morning and you laze around the house and maybe you make breakfast and then all of a sudden it's noon and you're like, where did my day go? And I think when I was doing more things, I was more effective with my schedule. And I think that's something that I've definitely lost as I've gotten older. And I think, again, if you don't have that desire and interest of oh, I'm going to wake up on a Saturday morning and read a book or go to rehearsal or to go do these things, you wind up finding other ways to fill your time that don't fill it and just kind of pass the time.
Okay. Sorry? Okay. Okay, so thank you, Emily, a lot. And a great applause for Emily again.